In the year 1092 CE, the most powerful man in Persia walked out of his palace gates on a Friday afternoon to attend prayers. His name was Nizam al-Mulk, and he was the vizier of the Seljuk Empire, which controlled everything from Turkey to Afghanistan. He had armies, he had bodyguards, he had an intelligence network that reached across 3 continents. None of it mattered. As he approached the mosque, a man disguised as a Sufi holy beggar rushed forward as if to kiss his hand. Instead, he pulled a dagger and stabbed the vizier in the chest. The assassin was immediately killed by guards, but Nizam al-Mulk was already dying. The message had been delivered. No one is safe. This was not a random murder. This was a calculated political execution carried out by a group that operated from a mountain fortress called Alamut. They were led by a man named Hassan-i Sabbah, and they had just proven that they could reach anyone, anywhere, at any time. The Seljuk Empire tried to destroy them for 2 centuries and failed. The Mongols finally demolished their castles in 1256, but even then they did not disappear. They evolved. Their descendants exist today. This is just one group on a list of 10 secret assassin cults that terrified the most powerful empires in human history. Some operated for centuries, some killed thousands, some were erased so thoroughly that we can barely prove they existed. But all of them shared one thing in common. They understood that a single person with a blade and total commitment could accomplish what armies could not. And the empires that tried to erase them from history all learned the same lesson. You cannot kill an idea. You can only drive it underground.
Hassan-i Sabbah was not a warrior, he was a scholar. Born in Qom, Iran around 1050 CE, he studied theology and became a devoted member of the Ismaili Shia sect. When political and religious conflicts made Persia dangerous for Ismailis, Hassan decided he needed a fortress. In 1090, he traveled to Alamut Castle, a mountain stronghold in northern Iran built on a peak so steep it was called the Eagle's Nest. Hassan did not conquer it with an army, he infiltrated it. He disguised himself as a school teacher named Dekhoda and spent months converting the garrison and local population to his beliefs. By the time the castle's governor realized what was happening, everyone around him supported Hassan. The governor left peacefully, and Hassan took control without a single battle. From Alamut, Hassan built what was essentially the first medieval intelligence agency. He recruited young men, trained them in languages, disguise, combat, and assassination techniques, and deployed them across the Middle East. These operatives were called fida'is, devotees willing to die for the cause. When Hassan ordered an assassination, the fida'i would infiltrate the target's court, sometimes spending years establishing trust. Then, at the designated moment, he would strike in public, knowing he would die immediately afterward. The psychological impact was devastating. Think about what that means if you are a medieval king. Your bodyguards cannot protect you because the killer is already inside your court. Your wealth cannot save you because the assassin does not want your money. Your power means nothing because the person sent to kill you has accepted death as part of the mission. That is not just murder, that is existential terror. The Seljuk Empire sent multiple armies to besiege Alamut. They all failed. The castle was built on a mountain with only one approach, and Hassan had converted enough people in surrounding regions that he always had allies who could break sieges from behind. In 1118, after the last major siege failed, Hassan lived the rest of his life in peace, rarely leaving his quarters. He read, wrote religious texts, and managed his network of operatives. When he died in 1124, his successors continued the system for another 132 years, until the Mongols finally destroyed Alamut in 1256. But even then, the Ismaili community survived. Today, their spiritual leader is the Aga Khan, who oversees millions of followers and charitable foundations worth billions. The assassins did not disappear. They transformed.
On the other side of the world, in the mountains and valleys of feudal Japan, another group of covert operatives was developing techniques that would define espionage and assassination for centuries. They were the shinobi, better known as ninja. Unlike the Ismailis, who were unified under a single leader, the ninja were fragmented networks of clans, primarily from the Iga and Koka regions. They were not ideologists, they were professionals. They worked for whoever paid them. During Japan's Sengoku period, from 1467 to 1615, every warlord needed intelligence, and every warlord needed enemies eliminated quietly. The ninja provided both services. Here is a concrete example of how they operated.
In 1562, the warlord Tokugawa Ieyasu hired ninja from Koka to infiltrate Kaminogo Castle, which was held by the rival Imagawa clan. The castle was heavily defended, with walls, watchtowers, and hundreds of soldiers. A conventional assault would cost lives Tokugawa could not afford to lose. The ninja attacked at 2 in the morning. They scaled the walls using climbing claws and ropes, moved through the castle grounds without being detected, set fire to the keep and armory to create chaos, and in the confusion, killed the castle commander and over 50 soldiers. Then they escaped before reinforcements arrived. By dawn, the castle had fallen, and Tokugawa had not lost a single man. The ninja were feared because they operated without honor codes. Samurai followed Bushido, which demanded face-to-face combat and loyalty to a single master. Ninja had no such restrictions. They used poison, disguise, arson, and infiltration. They pretended to be servants, merchants, or entertainers to get close to targets. Female ninja, called kunoichi, were particularly effective because they could access spaces men could not. Disguised as servants or entertainers, they gathered intelligence and sometimes poisoned targets who never suspected the woman serving their tea was a trained operative. The most famous ninja in Japanese history was Hattori Hanzo, who served Tokugawa Ieyasu and helped him unify Japan. When the Edo period began in 1603 and Japan entered an era of peace, the need for ninja diminished. Many transitioned into other professions. Some became bodyguards. Others used their knowledge of poisons and chemistry to work as doctors or firework makers. By the 18th century, the ninja clans had faded into history, but their legend grew precisely because they succeeded in remaining invisible. Even today, historians cannot agree on how much of the ninja legend is real versus theatrical invention, and that ambiguity is exactly what the ninja wanted. They erased themselves.
While the ninja operated in Japan and the Hashishin controlled Persia, ancient Judea under Roman occupation was home to one of the most brutal resistance movements in history. They were called the Sicarii, the daggermen. They appeared in the 1st century CE, when the Jewish population of Judea was divided between those who collaborated with Rome and those who saw collaboration as betrayal. The Sicarii belonged to the second group, and they did not believe in negotiations. They believed in blood. Their weapon was the sika, a short, curved dagger that could be hidden under clothing. During major Jewish festivals, when Jerusalem's population swelled with pilgrims, the Sicarii would blend into crowds at the temple complex, approach high-profile collaborators, strike with a single thrust to vital organs, drop the weapon, and then join the crowd in screaming and fleeing. Witnesses saw chaos and panic. They did not see a specific killer. The Jewish historian Josephus recorded that the Sicarii's first major victim was the high priest Jonathan, killed in 56 CE during a crowded festival. The assassination was so clean that no one could identify the killer, even though it happened in front of thousands of people in broad daylight. Think about the psychology of that for a moment. Jonathan was one of the most protected men in Judea, surrounded by temple guards, attending a religious ceremony in the holiest site in Judaism, and he was murdered anyway. If the high priest was not safe, no one was. That was the point. The Sicarii wanted collaborators to understand that Roman protection meant nothing. The Sicarii played a central role in igniting the first Jewish revolt in 66 CE. They captured Masada, a fortress in the Judean desert, armed themselves with weapons from Roman arsenals, and marched on Jerusalem. For a brief time, they succeeded in expelling Roman forces from the city. But then internal conflicts began. Other Jewish factions wanted negotiated settlements with Rome. The Sicarii wanted total war. To force unity, they burned Jerusalem's grain supplies, believing starvation would make everyone fight. Instead, it triggered civil war inside the besieged city. When Rome finally breached Jerusalem in 70 CE, tens of thousands died. The Sicarii retreated to Massa and held out for 3 more years against a siege force of 9,000 Roman soldiers. In 73 CE, when Rome built a massive ramp to breach the fortress, the Sicarii made a final decision. According to Josephus, they committed mass suicide rather than be captured. 960 people died. When the Romans entered, they found only bodies and silence. Rome spent 7 years and extraordinary resources to destroy a group of 1,000 assassins. Archaeological excavations at Masada have confirmed Josephus's account. The coins found there are inscribed with "For the freedom of Zion." The Sicarii saw themselves as liberators. Rome tried to erase them by calling them terrorists, but the evidence remains.
In 13th century India, travelers began disappearing along trade routes in numbers that could not be explained by normal banditry.
The British East India Company first noticed the pattern in the early 1800s when merchants reported caravans of 20 or 30 people vanishing without a trace. What investigators discovered was a cult of ritual stranglers who had operated for centuries. They were called Thuggee, from the Hindi word thug, meaning deceiver. They worshipped the goddess Kali and believed every murder was a holy sacrifice. The Thuggee traveled disguised as merchants, pilgrims, or soldiers. They joined caravans, gained trust over days or weeks, and then struck at night when victims were most vulnerable. The method was precise. A Thuggee would approach a sleeping traveler, loop a yellow scarf called a rumal around the neck, and strangle the victim into unconsciousness within seconds, using a technique that compressed the carotid arteries and prevented screaming. The bodies were buried immediately or thrown into wells. Entire caravans could disappear, and no one would know what happened. The Thuggee had strict rituals. Before an expedition, they performed religious ceremonies. After a successful killing, they divided the victim's possessions according to rank. They believed they were serving Kali, and many genuinely saw their actions as sacred duty rather than crime. In 1830, British Administrator William Sleeman launched a systematic campaign to destroy the Thuggee. He arrested thousands of suspects over the next decade. Many confessed in detail, describing their methods, their beliefs, and their victims. Between 1830 and 1841, Sleeman's forces captured over 3,700 Thuggee. About 500 were hanged. The rest were imprisoned for life. By 1870, the Thuggee as an organized force had been eradicated. But here's where the story gets complicated. Modern historians question whether British accounts exaggerated the threat. Some argue the Thuggee were criminal gangs whose activities were inflated by colonial authorities to justify expanding British control over India. Others point to multiple independent sources, including Indian witnesses and Thuggee confessions, confirming that ritual strangulation cults existed. The truth is probably in between. There were likely criminal groups using religious justification, but the British probably inflated numbers to create a narrative of civilization versus barbarism. Regardless, the erasure succeeded. Most people today have never heard of the Thuggee, and the word thug has been stripped of its original religious meaning and turned into generic slang. That is cultural erasure through language.
The Spanish Inquisition is famous for public trials and burnings, but most people don't know about the covert operatives the Inquisition employed to eliminate enemies who could not be prosecuted publicly. They were called familiars, lay members who swore oaths of secrecy and received legal immunity, tax exemptions, and authority to carry weapons. When the Inquisition identified someone as a heretic but lacked evidence for a public trial, or when a target was too politically connected to accuse openly, the familiars handled the problem quietly. People disappeared. They died in apparent accidents. Witnesses who might testify against Inquisition interests suddenly recanted or died before trial. Modern historians have documented cases where familiars almost certainly committed murder, but the killings were disguised so well that no direct evidence links them to the church. One specific example involves Juan de Valdez, a printer in 1541 who published books the church deemed heretical. He had powerful political protections that made prosecution difficult. He died when his printing shop mysteriously caught fire and he was trapped inside. Witnesses claimed the doors had been barred from outside. The official investigation called it accidental negligence. His family insisted it was murder. Historians examining the case centuries later found that 2 Inquisition familiars were seen near the shop that night and received payments from Inquisition funds shortly after. Coincidence? Possibly. But the pattern repeated across dozens of similar cases. When the Spanish Inquisition was abolished in 1834, the records of familiar activities were either destroyed or sealed in Vatican archives where they remain classified today. The Church successfully erased the evidence of its assassination program. Most histories of the Inquisition focus on public trials while ignoring covert murders. That is deliberate institutional amnesia.
During the Ming Dynasty in China, the imperial court employed a secret police force called the Jinyi Wei, the Embroidered Uniform Guard. Officially, they were bodyguards and investigators. Unofficially, they operated a network of spies and assassins with unlimited authority. They had their own prisons where suspects disappeared for months or years. Torture was routine. False confessions were extracted and used to justify purchase. In 1449, Wang Zhen, the Minister of War, was suspected of planning to overthrow the emperor. Before any public accusations could be made, Wang Zhen died suddenly while traveling. The official report stated he was killed by bandits, but witnesses later testified that the men who killed him wore Jinyi Wei badges under their disguises. The investigation was suppressed. Wang Zhen's entire family was arrested on treason charges, tortured into confessing crimes they did not commit, and executed. Their property was confiscated. No one questioned the narrative. The Jinyi Wei were disbanded in 1661, but the Qing dynasty replaced them with a similar organization. The tactics continued under a different name. Later Chinese dynasties deliberately minimized Jinyi Wei activities in official histories to distance themselves from Ming brutality. It was not until 20th century historians examined private letters that the full scope of operations became clear. The erasure was institutional and systematic.
In 17th century Ottoman Turkey, within the elite Janissary Corps existed a secret inner circle trained for assassination and political enforcement. They were called the Hassan-i Pasha, and they operated with complete immunity as long as they served the Sultan. In 1654, the Venetian ambassador to Constantinople died suddenly during diplomatic negotiations. Ottoman officials called it food poisoning. 3 months later, Venetian spies uncovered evidence that a Hassan Pasha agent had poisoned the ambassador's wine. But by the time Venice could protest, the suspect servant had died in custody, and the agent had vanished. The Ottomans denied everything, and Venice had no proof strong enough to risk war. When Sultan Muhammad II abolished the Janissaries in 1826, thousands were killed in what became known as the Auspicious Incident. The Hassan Pasha either died in the purge or disappeared into civilian life. Whatever records existed were destroyed. Most modern histories of the Ottoman Empire do not even acknowledge the Hassan Pasha existed. The evidence was erased that thoroughly.
During China's Warring States period, professional assassins called K operated openly as specialists for hire. The most famous was Jing Kai, who in 227 BCE attempted to kill the king of Qin. Jing Kai hid a poisoned dagger inside a rolled map and presented it as a diplomatic gift. When he unrolled the map, the blade was revealed. Jing Kai grabbed it and lunged, but the king dodged. His heavy ceremonial robes tangled the blade. For several minutes, the most powerful man in China ran around a throne room pillar while Jing Kai chased him. Palace guards stood helpless outside because they were forbidden from entering the throne room armed. Finally, an advisor threw a medicine bag at Jing Kai, distracting him long enough for the king to draw his own sword and wound the assassin. The guards rushed in and killed Jing Kai. The assassination failed. The king survived, conquered China, and became the first emperor. When he ordered official histories written, he heavily censored the K. Jing Kai's failed attempt became famous because it could not be suppressed, but hundreds of other successful K assassinations were erased entirely because later emperors did not want to acknowledge that political murder was common and accepted.
Finally, there were the Eternal Serpents, an alleged Christian sect in the Byzantine Empire between the 8th and 11th centuries. According to fragmentary Arab and Armenian sources, they believed political assassination was divine judgment. They operated through sleeper agents embedded in monasteries, churches, and the imperial palace. These agents lived normal lives for years, waiting for orders to strike. When designated, they acted, knowing they would be caught and executed. But because the sect was decentralized, authorities could never dismantle the entire network. The problem with the Eternal Serpents is that almost no reliable evidence survives. There are no internal documents, no archaeological confirmation, no definitive proof. Some historians believe they were real, but exaggerated. Others believe the entire story was invented to explain unrelated assassinations. If the Eternal Serpents existed, they were erased so completely we cannot prove it. If they were fictional, the erasure is even more complete because a myth has become confused with history. Either way, we will probably never know the truth. That is the ultimate success of erasure.
The pattern across all 10 groups is clear. Empires fear assassination cults not because of body counts, but because they undermine the fundamental assumption that power provides security. A king can build fortresses, hire armies, and surround himself with guards, and yet a single determined person with a concealed weapon can bypass all of it. That is why empires try so desperately to erase these groups from history. It is not just about eliminating the threat, it is about eliminating the idea that the threat is possible. But the historical record proves otherwise. The Sicarii held Masada for 3 years against Rome. The Hashishin operated for over a century. The Thuggee killed for 600 years. The ninja became so legendary their mystique persists today. Some were destroyed, some faded away, some evolved.
but none were completely forgotten. You can burn the books, destroy the records, kill the members, and rewrite the histories, but if even one story survives, the memory persists, and the idea that empires can be vulnerable to shadows continues to inspire new generations who believe power is not invincible. The empires are gone. The assassins are remembered. That is the ultimate failure of erasure.